podcast. You're listening to the premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane.
It is the H-Town Hoops podcast. Brandon Scott here with you. Adam Spolane, Austin Mendez handling things for us behind the scenes. We're going to get to some end-of-season awards and discussion for the Rockets. But before we do, Adam, man, I was looking at the schedule at the end of last week and just thinking about you, man. Like, U of H, no more U of H basketball. The Rockets are done. And then the Astros go on the road. I'm curious, man, are you like bored or rested? Like, how do you take in that sort of workload once everybody's kind of either not playing or out of town?
Well, I mean, so I've had a couple days here because the Astros were they were at home through Wednesday. So it took a couple days, and then I'll take a couple more days, and then we got the draft here coming up on the NFL draft on Thursday. So I'll help you guys out for that. So we've taken the foot like squarely off the gas because I mean I was doing all those Astros games. We had Rockets and Astros overlap Tuesday. I did the afternoon show with Ron on Monday, and then it went straight to Minute Maid. So, we kind of either go 100 miles an hour here or we go 20. It's just kind of the only speeds that I have, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. The 100 mile an hour can be fun sometimes, but I like the 20 because I don't know if y'all can tell. I got these bags under my eyes. If y'all are watching this on YouTube, I got these bags under my eyes because of the lack of sleep. So I welcome it every time. Look, before we get to these awards, I wanted to ask you, since you did mention how busy of a week it was last week. Last Tuesday, got to hear from Ime Udoka, got to hear from Rafael Stone, and I'm just curious what, if anything, stood out to you from talking to them. We're going to go through some things from the season, but if there was a moment or a serious or unserious that stood out to you, I've got mine. I'm curious of yours.
So I guess there were two things. I really wasn't all that interested in what Ime Udoka had to say, just because we've talked to Ime Udoka, however many times over the last 6 months. We don't really talk to Rafael Stone. Yeah, so we don't hear a lot from Rafael Stone. So a couple of things I guess stood out from Rafael was they think that this roster is good enough as is. Like, they think that this roster is good enough as is to compete at the highest levels, which I think that's a big question coming into this thing because they've made so many changes after the last few seasons where, they felt like they needed a talent influx or they needed a veteran leadership influx. And I don't think they feel like they need that now. So I think if they go into next season with the roster that they ended this past season with, plus you get Eason back, plus you get Steven Adams back, and then they're going to add a lottery pick from Brooklyn, I think that they would be content with that. The other thing I guess that stood out was, and I asked Rafael Stone about the extensions and if he felt that was a priority, and he basically said, we'll get something done. We're certainly open to it, but we don't feel like we have to because we do have restricted free agency. And then also I followed up with, do you think that you can sign all 6 of your guys? You have the 6 guys who they have drafted in the first round the last 3 years: Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore, and Amen Thompson. And he said yes. So I think that was the big thing, is that they feel like they will have the financial flexibility to extend all 6 of those first round picks.
So those are good observations. We're going to get, I think, a little bit more into that when we talk about.
Add one more thing to that. I think it's important too, and I think we'll probably talk about this later on in this podcast. There's always been kind of the thinking, well, they need to make some sort of a consolidation trade. And I think that the fact that they feel they can extend all 6 of those guys makes it seem like they don't need to worry about a consolidation trade. Like, they can just kind of go as is with the guys that they've already got, and they don't have to worry about, well, we can't keep all these guys. I think they believe that they can. All
right. So I'm just going to give my observation real quick because I want to go ahead and go into that since that was your biggest takeaway. My biggest takeaway was, or I wouldn't say biggest, but one of them that stood out to me, and I know we hear from Ime Udoka all the time, but in light of it being, I guess, with the 19-game improvement and overall being a success, this shouldn't be all that surprising. But in light of going home or not going into the play-in or postseason, Ime Udoka was very lighthearted. I mean, he was doing his best Richard Pryor Dave Chappelle, his sarcasm and comedy up there a couple of times when he was asked about the various different jobs that he had an opportunity to go to. And he said, if he hadn't gone to the Rockets, he'd still be coaching right now. He'd still be playing right now. And then the other one about the advice to Jalen Green when he tells him, hey, man, you should have, if you just done more of this or done this sooner, we'd still be playing right now. So I thought it was funny that he was willing to be funny in the postseason, sort of autopsy press conference there. But let's go ahead, Austin, pull up where improvement comes from, because I want to go ahead and just get into that, since that was the thing that Adam mentioned, because that stood out to me too, that even before they spoke, I thought, man, this is an interesting offseason for the Rockets, because it's one where it doesn't feel like there's this urgency to get rid of anybody or move off of anybody or bring anybody in particular in. And I'm trying to reconcile that with the fact that the Rockets were not quite good enough to even get into the play-in. So where does it feel like improvement comes from if they've got all of these established young players and veterans that they've brought in? I'm trying to figure out where's the spot, what's the move, where do you feel like improvement comes from for the Rockets?
I think it comes from all those guys getting better and just kind of seeing improvement from guys who are 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. And like, none of those guys are finished products. None of those guys have an aspect of their game where you say, okay, you're good here, you don't have to worry about this. No, they can all get better in basically every single facet of the game. And they also have the ability to grow together. And I think that's also important, because you see these teams who, like, I'm watching Boston right now, and Miami, and these are teams that for the most part have played together for a really long time. Like, there comes, when you do that, there's just like some institutional knowledge of one another, to where you're not having to start from scratch every single year. And you look at the team that ended last season, I think they only brought back like 4 or 5 of their top 14 in total minutes from the 2022-2023 season last year. So they were basically integrating all these new pieces, whether it were the 2 rookies with Thompson and Whitmore, or the veterans with Van Vliet and Brooks and Jeff Green and Landale and all these other guys. Plus, you got a new coaching staff. So you're basically starting from scratch with that group. If they go the route this offseason that they can go, which is, let's just run the whole thing back, well, then you're not starting over. You're going into training camp basically picking up where you left off from. So Udoka brought up something about the offense and how the offense was a little bit bland this year. Well, you kind of had to be bland with the offense, because you're basically all playing together for the first time. Now, if you are able to run it back, you're not starting over. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from whatever level that you ended this past season on, and then you're building from that. So that's where I think the improvement comes from. It's just from, hey, we've now played together for a year. We've now been in the league for a year, 2 years, 3 years. And so there's just a natural improvement that comes with that. But they're going to have to improve. Like, that's the big thing. Just because you look at the West, it's not like the West is going to fall back to them. And that was what we talked about when the season started. Like, the West is really good. And you look at the 10 teams that finished ahead of them, they'll all be trying to win. And then you've got Memphis that missed the playoffs. They'll get their guys back. San Antonio missed the playoffs. I imagine they will try to win with Wembanyama. I imagine that they will actually try to win next season. And then you've got Utah. Who knows? Utah can always compete, and they can always be in the mix. And then you've got Portland, I guess, is the one, bottom feeder in the Western Conference. But it shows you, like, you're going to have to raise your level. But I do think that with this group, if they bring them all back, they have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, sometimes it feels like an excuse or a cop-out to equate this past season to, hey, this is all of these guys' rookie year or their first season, or to call the first couple of seasons a waste, as if like they didn't play or if it wasn't valuable. But I think it does go a long way in explaining how much growth is there going into year 2 with Ime Udoka, going into year 2 under this same coaching staff and with this set of teammates. Like, it is, for all intents and purposes, a brand new team. So for me, the improvement comes from, Jalen Green taking the next step on being a better defender and floor reader, which he was this year, right? Like he made those steps this year, and I don't think it would be fair to say that he like reached a peak at it, right? Like we started to see him turn a corner there, and that was a big reason why he had the big month that he had, the big month of March that he had, toward the end of the season. Improvement comes from Alperen Şengün building off of what he was before his injury, which was excellent. I mean, he was playing great before his injury, but still also improving a lot of the intricacies of his game that we talk about all the time. It's Amen Thompson as a point guard prospect improving. Like they asked him to do things that were not point, like he did not play point guard, right? Well, at some point he is going to play his position. So you want to see him obviously become a better shooter, become a better ball handler, but becoming more comfortable with the things that he does well and improving on the things that he doesn't necessarily do as well. Cam Whitmore obviously has an infinite amount of room to improve in his game, since he's I feel like kind of a one-dimensional player, as dynamic as he is. And of course, Tari Eason was injured for the majority of the year. So, and of course, Jabari Smith Jr. is somebody who I think is, improving as well. I think the fact that they are improving and that they are so young is a good sign, but we can't overlook the fact, even though I shy away from this because I don't like to make it as an excuse to say, oh, it was their rookie year, or it was their first season. But I do feel like the second season under these same circumstances and under this same environment allows for improvement in and of itself.
Yeah, you're right. And you look at just how they improved from the start of the year, and their first game of the year was against Orlando in Orlando, and they lost by 30. The last game they played this season, essentially that mattered, was that game at Toyota Center against Orlando. Last week, the week before, whatever it was.
Their last home game. Yeah.
Yes, and you could see how much better they had gotten from point A to point B. And the thing with point B is that they were playing without Şengün. They were playing without East. Like they were playing without big pieces in that second game, and yet they were still a much better team in the second Orlando game than they were in the first Orlando game. So I think that shows you that they don't have to be 100% to still show that sort of improvement. So I thought that it was a very positive year in that regard, where guys that they needed to see show some development did just that. The veterans that they brought in really turned out to be the perfect fits for their team, and it gave them a bit of an attitude. It gave them a level of professionalism that they were really lacking. So that sort of stuff matters. And then you are able to bring in some pieces next year, whether it's Adams, who's going to add some physicality, whether it's getting Eason back totally healthy. They were a completely different team when he was on the floor defensively, when he was out there. And then they'll add a lottery pick. This is not a great lottery by any stretch. This is not going to be a great draft, but you have an opportunity with that lottery pick to add somebody who can help you. And as we've seen, it's hard to keep guys healthy for an 82-game season. So if you can add another, important rotation player, that will help you. And we'll have to see what direction they want to go in. The way that they have done things in the past is that they tend to draft for the highest ceiling. Maybe they go for a guy who's got the high floor. Maybe somebody like Dalton Knecht falls to them, and Dalton Knecht would right away play for them just because of the shooting ability. So they're in a really good position right now. I just think the big thing that they need to do, and this is what I would do if I were them, I would let this thing grow. I would not. I don't feel like they need to try and push the chips in right now. I think that would probably not be the smart decision. I think you've seen other teams try it, and frankly, it hasn't really worked. Unless the only way that I move off this is if, let's say, Luka Doncic gets angry in Dallas and wants to get out, or let's say Victor Wembanyama does not want to be in San Antonio anymore, or Anthony Edwards decides that it's too cold in Minnesota and he wants to come down south. Those are the only basically.
Giannis.
No, Giannis is a little too old for me. I'll be honest with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me see exactly how old Giannis is at this
He's
point.
Like 28.
He's 29. He'll turn 30 in December.
Okay.
So for me, listen, I get it, but I don't know if I'd even want to go there just because of the age thing. And now you're starting to see the injuries start to creep up with him. So I think that anybody who's about to turn 30 before New Year's Day, I think I might pass on.
Hold on. We got to mark this moment. We're going to move on at some point. We got to mark this moment, though, because I feel like we've stumbled upon something. Adam Spolane right now on the H-Town Hoops podcast is going on record as saying he would take this Rockets core over Giannis, right? What the Rockets have going for them, not any one particular player. Like I think on most one-for-one deals maybe, but you would take what the Rockets have going right now, their core, over Giannis, correct?
If you were to say, hey, we want 2 of the top 6, plus we want all the Brooklyn picks, and we want some of your own first-round picks. For Giannis, I don't think I would do it. I really don't. I just it's the age thing with me. And I know 30 is different, but I got all these guys who are 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, and I just don't like the idea of now all of a sudden we're going to build around a guy who's going to be 30 pretty soon. So yeah, that's my reasoning for that. It has nothing, like if Giannis were 27, it'd be totally different. Right. But Giannis at about to be 30, that's where it changes for me.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it until I just blurted his name out while we were talking. But as we talked through it, I think I'm with you on that. Like I think there's enough promise here, especially at the top end, but really through all 6. Like I feel like all 6 are, for the most part, plus NBA players. I would want to see what this thing could turn into before because I feel like you said, 27-year-old Giannis is a different story, but I feel like there's a ceiling on what 30-plus-year-old Giannis could get you, which is, to me, also the worst-case scenario on what the ceiling on this is, right? Like, if they improve, worst-case scenario, the Rockets are going to be a middling Western Conference team. Like, they'll be a 6 seed or something like that eventually, or a 7 seed. I don't feel like Giannis is getting you that much better in the West. I feel like that's basically what you are. So it's bringing in another, a brand name. It's Giannis, but the prospect of it or the idea of it. But to me, you're probably better off. I think, improvement comes from consistency, right? Like the fact that, and I'll get to that a little bit later on, but I think that's a big part of where improvement is going to come from with this team, because I don't think we got to this, but the last time we talked was going into that Golden State game. We talked about how much it mattered, how meaningful it would be, even though it was unlikely that these guys would get into the play-in, but how you showed up for that game would matter. And I thought, Adam, at the end of the season, and this is why, to me, the Orlando game, that final home game that you talked about, was also important, because we juxtaposed it to the first game of the season when they played Orlando, to the last home game of the season when they played Orlando. But I also juxtaposed it to games that they were supposed to show up for, like that Golden State game that, they got thoroughly outplayed and outclassed. And then I believe it's the road game against Dallas, I think, is another one. And so we didn't cover those, but I thought it was just as impressive or just as important that they responded from those moments, those more recent games or those more recent letdowns, sort of in the short-term analysis. Okay, they can bounce back. These were disappointing games. They should have shown up better, and they bounced back in this way. And then also the larger picture view of how they started in Orlando versus how they finished in Houston versus Orlando.
And remember, Orlando needed that game too. Orlando had not clinched the playoff spot, and they were still they still could have gotten up to 2 in the Eastern Conference had they won that game. So that game mattered to both teams. That's why I brought that one up, just because the Rockets played their guys. I think it was Utah was the game after Orlando, but Utah didn't care, and of course Utah wound up winning that game, which makes it kind of funny. But Utah didn't care. Obviously, the Rockets didn't care. They had kind of put all their eggs into that Orlando basket, and then the Rockets really didn't. They won the last 2 games, but they weren't. They sat some guys in those 2. That's why I chose Orlando as the game to kind of wrap the season up on. But the other thing just about the Giannis deal is just that I want young guys. I want the guys who you can count on for the next 10 years to be at the top of their game. That's why I specifically brought up the 3 guys that I brought up. And there will be other guys, I'm sure, that will come up. Like, I wouldn't do Embiid. Embiid could be one of those guys who could be, on the block. I'm not messing with that. And Embiid is a little bit older than Giannis at this point. I would not do Donovan Mitchell. I would not want to break up this core for Donovan Mitchell, who is he's in the right age range, but is Donovan Mitchell really going to raise your ceiling like that? Same thing with Darius Garland. Darius Garland, he's in that age range, but again, he's not going to raise your ceiling. And then you've got the two Atlanta guards with Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, and I would pass on both of those guys as well. So I think there is something about you drafted these guys, you developed these guys, let them grow together for another year, see what you've got. And I think the best way to look at it is Orlando is the right team to look at, where Orlando has kind of let this group grow together and they're in the playoffs for the first time. They're going to kind of learn a lot about their team over this playoff series with Cleveland. Oklahoma City's in the same boat. They've let that OKC team grow a little bit together, and now they're going to see what it looks like once they get to the postseason. Oklahoma City could have made a big move at the deadline, maybe broken up that core, maybe given away some of their draft assets, but they basically chose to stand pat. And I think that there's something fun about that, just organizationally.
All right, Adam. We agree, and I think it's pretty much universally agreed upon that this was a successful season for the Rockets. The 19-game turnaround, the 500 record. There were some letdowns, but overall, big picture, it was a successful season. So with that in mind, let's do some awards here, or at least some postseason analysis here on the Rockets. And let's start with the season MVP. I think I've seen this on Twitter/X already, who your Rockets MVP is. But for the people, for the H-Town Hoops audience, let us know who is your Rockets season MVP and why.
So I would go with Fred VanVleet. Again, he wasn't their best player this season, but he was their most valuable. And when he didn't play, they were a very different team than when he did play. They were a +3 in net rating when he was on the floor. They were a -3.2 net rating when he was off the floor. I'm going through kind of his game log right now. 0-1, 0-2. They were, let's see, that is 0-5, 1-6. They were 1-6 before the All-Star break. When he did not play, he played in every game after the break except for those last two games when they won. So they're 1-6 in the games that actually mattered when he did not play. That shows a lot right there. He brought a level of professionalism that they didn't have. He gave them the ability to run a functional offense, which is something that they did not do the last couple of years. The turnover rate, that was a huge difference for them. Their ability to just value possessions, that was important for them. Again, the professionalism both on and off the floor, it really mattered. And he bought into being a leader. That was the one thing from day one where that's basically what he wanted his role to be. And he talked about what he learned from Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry was kind of his vet when he first came into the league in Toronto. And he took the lesson that Kyle Lowry gave him where, hey, you got to basically pay it forward. I'm doing this for you. You're going to do it for the next group. And that's what he did. So I think that was, we talked a lot about adding a guard in free agency a year ago at this time. And I think the consensus was going to be that it was James Harden, and James Harden was the way to go. I think that they got it right by passing on James Harden and going with Fred VanVleet. I just think that you could not have asked for that to have worked out any better than it did.
Yeah, I've had to fall on the sword for that one. I mean, I even said on this podcast not that long ago that the Rockets made a mistake by choosing Fred VanVleet over James Harden. Turns out I made a mistake by having that opinion. And I think I've atoned for that. I've mentioned that in previous episodes and online, on the air, on Sports Radio 610 and all of that. But it is true, man. Fred VanVleet's impact on this team, his value on this team should not be understated. You did a good job of laying out the reasons why, his value overall. I'm going to go ahead and go with Alperen Sengun because he was their best player. But value and best is not necessarily the same thing. I thought the value in Sengun also showed itself when it turned out, Jock Landale early in the season was not healthy, and they didn't really have a backup center. That was a part of the conversation with the Rockets for a while, and a part of their need at the trade deadline, something that they were supposed to try to address. They ended up getting Steven Adams for the next year, and they will have a presence in Steven Adams off the bench. But I thought Alperen Şengün, and maybe this is more of a case, me saying that he's in the MVP, more of a case for most improved. And maybe he is a candidate for most improved player. I don't know, but league wide. But in terms of just the Rockets, like the fact that he was able to take over as their clear cut, far and away best player up until his injury, I thought was significant. You could probably say he was their best player of the year before at times as well, but I thought it was just undeniable this year watching them. And so the growth of Alperen Şengün, the accepting of the challenge, I think, from Ime Udoka, and this is back-to-back years now where we've seen Alperen Şengün sort of respond, and that's sort of my takeaway from him, is that he responds to adversity, conflict, whatever you want to call it. He seems to respond to it well. Remember like last year, second year, he comes in there and he's not in the best of shape and kind of losing his starting job in the very beginning. And he responds to that, I thought, very well. And then this year with a tough coach, perhaps harder coaching under Ime Udoka, he goes out there and he's far and away their best player. We know he's got some areas in his game to improve. I think the shooting's got to improve overall, continue to get in better shape, things like that. But just when I think of their most valuable player, it might even be a moment like that San Antonio game where he absolutely baptizes Victor Wembanyama head to head. No, maybe it's that game that stands out to me, but or has that lasting impression that has me thinking of him as the MVP. I think Fred VanVleet has a good case for it, but Alperen Şengün overall was clearly their best player this year.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I really can't. The Wembanyama game against San Antonio, that was basically his last game of the year. I mean, he played the one game against Sacramento, and then that was basically it. He might have played a couple of games. I can't remember at this point.
It's the last, but to your point though, it's the lasting impression of his season that I have. Is him
putting 41 up on the Rookie of the Year and the guy who's probably going to finish top 3 in Defensive Player of the Year voting. I feel like
did he not follow it up with a triple-double? Like I feel like he had. I feel like somewhere sandwiched in between, either before that game, I'm blanking on the memory of the sequence of games now, but either before that or right after it, there was a triple-double, maybe even in a loss.
Yeah, there was. It was against the Clippers, the game that they lost, where he was, 23 points, 19 rebounds. Yeah, those are 2 really good games to go back to end your year. Then there was a game at Portland where nobody cared about because the Blazers didn't care, and then he got hurt in Sacramento. So, yeah, that was a really good way. And the other thing about that Clippers game was that he played 42 minutes. I think that this season showed a lot with Şengün. And I remember going back last year, right before the deadline, I'm talking to one of their front office guys, and it's before the trade deadline, and their defense was just absolutely terrible at the time. And I'm asking, like, do you guys think that you can have like a league average defense with Şengün at center? And the answer I got was a pretty, profound yes, we think that we can. And they showed that they can not only be league average with him as their center, they can be above league average because they were one of the better defensive teams in the league for a good portion of the season when he was out there. So I think that was important, and that showed just like what the ceiling actually can be with him. He's going to, he's not, this is what we're going to say with all these guys, he's not a finished product yet. Like there's a lot of things that he can get better. And when Udoka basically said before the Orlando game that he wasn't going to play anymore this season, I asked, what are like the specific things that you want him to work on? And the first thing he said was like, just work on your body. And, it had nothing to do necessarily with basketball. It's just like, hey, continue to get in better shape, work on your body, work on your strength. And that's going to really take you to the next level, because I think you saw it this year. Like he showed up to camp in much better shape than he did last year. And the results were there. And so when you're in better shape, when you're stronger, it's just going to make you a better player. Now, there are little things in his game that need to get better. He needs to become a better rebounder, or at least a defensive rebounder. The shooting, they keep talking about him wanting to be a better shooter. I've been hearing this now for 3 years. At some point, he's actually going to have to do it. But the fact that he's just got to become, more, he's just got to be one of these guys who's more willing to take that shot. If they're going to give it to you, take it. At least make them have to think about guarding you, because it's only going to give space for everybody else. And again, just, the more reps that you have on the floor with all these other guys, the better you're going to be, the more comfortable you'll be with them, and the more you feel like it's just like the more that you kind of understand each other's games and you understand what you can do with these guys on the floor.
Adam, I want to see him double this 3-point attempt number. I know his percentages are not great. His form looks fine. I don't have any issue with the way the shot looks. I just want it to fall down a little bit more. And I want him to take more of them. And I might be ridiculous for this because maybe it's just not what he does well. Maybe I'm trying to square peg a round hole here. But I feel like just in the modern NBA, and especially if Jalen Green is going to blossom the way that we saw him toward the end of the year, and this nonsensical discussion about whether these two guys can play together, I don't buy into that. But I do think it would help with them playing together if both of them shot the ball better from outside or shot the ball from outside better. Okay, if whichever one of them is cooking, if the other dude is able to knock down an outside shot with some level of regularity or reliability. Now, Alperen Sengun, now 3 years into the league, has never taken more or at least 2 3-pointers a game. I'd like to see him take 3 or 4. I know I said double, so that would be closer to 4, but I'd like to see him take 3 or 4 3-pointers a game. I don't know if I'm crazy for that, but I feel like that's just today's game. He's got to be able to do that. And, to your point about being willing to take the shot, I feel like there's probably 3 or 4 of them out there for him a game that he probably passes up 1 or 2. So I'm right there with you in terms of just wanting to see him take more threes, make more threes, and this Rockets team overall has to be a better team shooting from outside.
Well, he actually did double his 3-point attempts this year. He went from double.
Yeah. That's right.
He went from 57 this year to 111 this year. If you go by a per 36 basis, he was at 0.9 3-point attempts last year to exactly 2.0 per 36 minutes this year. So, he did do that. But again, like you said, you got to be more than, for him, he's probably got to be at, like you said, 3 or 4 aside from 2, because those opportunities are there, and too many times he'll hesitate and then shoot it, and it's never going to go in when you hesitate like that. So just be confident in the shot. You put the work in. He's worked on that shot. Be confident enough to take it and take it. If it goes in, great. If it doesn't, who cares? Take the next one.
Adam, who is your biggest surprise, or what is your biggest surprise? It can be a who, it can be a what, it can be whatever you want it to be. It's our podcast. So what is the biggest surprise to you from this Rocket season?
So I'll have 2, and I just talked about the first one with Sengun and the defense, and the fact that you can have a very good defense with him on the floor, because I was skeptical that you could, but he kind of showed, and credit to him, credit to just the scheme that they went to. You can have more than a passable defense with him out there. So that's big. The other thing was just how good the 2 rookies were. I wasn't expecting a whole lot, especially Amen Thompson. He looked really good, and he showed that he can really be a player. And I didn't think he was going to play a whole lot this year. Now, part of that was they were supposed to have Kevin Porter Jr. out there, and that obviously did not happen. And he showed some versatility. He showed some elite level defense. The rebounding, I think, is going to be huge for him, because he can just grab a rebound and take off. And this is a team that wants to play fast. You showed them really start to play fast after the All-Star break. And a lot of that is that the guards would get a rebound and take off down the floor. And they didn't have to wait for anybody. If Sengun was out there, they would take off. If the transition opportunity dried up, they would just wait for him to get down the floor, and they would dump it into him and let him go to work. So his ability to rebound, his ability to defend, his ability to get to the rim, the athleticism is off the charts. And if he learns how to shoot, he's a special player. Like, he really could be a special player. Cam Whitmore, the shooting was a whole lot better than I thought it was going to be. He likes to do it. He definitely, it's definitely not from a lack of trying, but he was one of their better 3-point shooters. Just catch and shoot. He can make plays. The athleticism we knew was great. That was, I think, probably maybe even better than advertised. He's got to work on other aspects of his game. Obviously, he's 19 years old, but he did show improvement with that stuff as the season went along. He got better when it came to distributing the basketball as the season went along. So I did not think that he was going to contribute much at all this season, and part of it was just the injuries, the fact that some guys got hurt. And he took advantage of that opportunity. He got better in the G League. When he did get his chance at the NBA level, he produced, and it got to the point where he was in the rotation. I don't know if they thought he was necessarily going to be in the rotation this season, but it happened, and it showed that he was a steal with the 20th pick in the draft.
Yeah, I always thought he would be a steal. It was a little bit ridiculous that I wanted him to draft him 4th since he was available at 20. So good thing I'm not a GM. But I do feel validated in some ways for feeling that way, for feeling as positively about him as I did going into the draft. And to your point about him being a steal, he validated that, right, through his play. I would go back to your point about Amen Thompson, because I think we share. I'm not gonna. I don't have anybody other than Amen Thompson, but more specifically, like I always thought he'd be, a good player. I didn't know how much he would contribute, but what I really didn't realize was how versatile he would be, and that the elite physical traits and the defense that we talked about would look like this. Like I've said this before on the podcast. I bet every dollar to my name, which is not a lot, but every dollar to my name, this guy will make an all NBA defensive team before his career is over, unless he gets hurt. Like if you promise me health, unless something absurd happens, right, to derail his career, you promise me a normal career for Amen Thompson, the guy is going to be an all NBA defensive player at some point before he retires. I would bet everything on it. And I would not have said that going in. Of course, I didn't know as much about his game coming from Overtime Elite, but I wouldn't have even had the hot take of, hey, this guy's going to be an elite defensive player. Dude, he is already, I'm not going to say elite because we just saw 1 year of it, but it's there. Like the elite traits, the ability to guard, 1 through 5 is a weird way to put it, but like just most guys, like just most NBA players, Amen Thompson is not a physical mismatch for them. Like he can do it. He's got the length, the athleticism, the want to, all of that, the skill, all of that. So I did not realize he would be as versatile a player. We talked about him, especially with him and his brother, right? The difference between the twins. One's a point guard, one's an off-ball guard. And I think I went into the season thinking about Amen Thompson in that prism. Like, okay, he's the backup point guard, or is he? When's he going to be good enough to take over as the starting point guard? Like I had this whole point guard thing in my mind. And then you go out there, or he goes out there and you see what the way that they used him and the way in which they needed him was, hey, actually we've got injuries elsewhere and you've got some positional flexibility and versatility. We need you to do this, that, and the third. And he was able to do it. I wouldn't have predicted that he could be, and this is probably just because of the narrative or the scouting report, but I wouldn't have predicted that he'd be somebody that you could rely on to play all those different positions. Once Alperen Sengun gets hurt, that you could insert him into the starting lineup. And in some ways, I'm not going to say they were a better team, but in some ways do things better. You talk about getting out in transition, the rebounding, the defense. I mean, all of those things I felt like enhanced the style of play that they were forced to adjust to without Alperen Sengun. But because of Amen Thompson's presence, they were able to do some things effectively. So, yeah, man, it's not just Amen Thompson's production, but the specific way it looked in the versatility and the elite defense, which I think is, like, I don't know if you can call the defense elite yet, but it's trending that way rather quickly, especially if he plays as much as he did this past year.
Yeah, and you wonder how things turn out differently, because remember, he was basically the 4th guard to start this season, where I think it was like Aaron Holiday and Amen Thompson were the first guards that were coming off the bench, and they really didn't try to kind of slide him down to the 3-4, to the 3 or the 4. And you wonder if they had maybe gotten to that sooner. Remember when Dillon Brooks got hurt in December? Maybe if they had given those minutes to Amen Thompson instead of Jayshawn Tate, maybe this thing turns out a little differently. Maybe they could have discovered that part of his game a little bit earlier. Maybe this season turns out differently. Now, listen, they could have predicted this, but the Ben Simmons comp is kind of real, as long as he turns out to really like basketball. And obviously, Ben Simmons has kind of had his career derailed, but there's no reason to think that from a talent standpoint that Amen Thompson can't be as good, if not better. He's, again, the shooting is going to be big for him moving forward, because you got to make teams guard you. but he's not afraid to get fouled. He'll go to the rim. He can be physical. And again, the defensive stuff is big. And I remember when we talked after the lottery, it was kind of seen as a bit of a disaster that they fell out of the top three and didn't give themselves Wembanyama or even Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson. And I think it probably worked out better for them to have landed fourth as opposed to third, because as they both have an NBA season under their belt, I would much rather have Amin Thompson than I want Scoot Henderson at this point. So I think they got lucky in that regard. They missed out on the top two, but to get Amin Thompson over Scoot Henderson is a huge win right now.
Yeah, you mentioned Jayshawn Tate over or getting those minutes early. I do wonder, I'm trying to just piece together the timeline in my memory right off the fly, but I do wonder how much his early injury, I'm trying to remember when exactly that was, but Amin Thompson
he hurt his ankle the fourth game of the season, and then he got sick too.
Yeah, he had the illness.
That impact. So listen, I would not have started Amin Thompson over Jayshawn Tate at that point. But let's say maybe that stuff happens, the Dylan Brooks injury happens a month later, then maybe the equation is different. But I don't think that they necessarily intended to play Amin Thompson the way that they wound up playing Amin Thompson. It just worked out really well, and it turned out that he has the skill set to be able to play that way.
Man, I'm trying to, before we move on, I'm trying to just think of ways to I'm trying to get a way to just keep him in the starting lineup. And I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, because obviously they still got Dylan Brooks. And of course, Jalen Green's going to be in the starting lineup. Jabari Smith is more than likely going to be in the starting lineup. So I'm trying to find a way to force him to put a sixth guy into a starting lineup of five, which obviously that math doesn't work. But do you see a way? Is there, like, how could this thing shake out next year? I don't know if Dylan Brooks is too expensive or too accomplished to come off the bench, or maybe he's not. Maybe he's willing to do that. I don't even know if that's the best idea, but I don't know. I went into the season thinking that Dylan Brooks was by far and away their best defensive player, and I end the season feeling like he's their most accomplished defensive player, but the best defensive player is going to be one Amin Thompson at some point.
Yeah, I don't think that there's necessarily a way to get him with that starting five next season, at least when they're all healthy. But I don't think it really matters who starts. I think I care a whole lot more about who finishes. And like I said, in the minutes. And I think that from a night in, night out basis, Udoka is going to be, I think the one thing that you learn about Udoka this season, and I'm sure we'll get to this in a second, but he did not have like a set rotation. Like, he was very flexible when it came to that sort of stuff, and he would adapt, and it would be this group, this game, and then that group, that game. So whoever's playing the best on a given night, that's going to be the guys who wind up closing out games. So, and also, I don't know if I would want Amin Thompson starting on a regular basis if the shooting isn't there. So that's the one thing. Like, if he can get the shot, if he can become passable, I think let me see where he finished up from three. I think he was at like 16% from three.
Oh, dude, it can't be over 20. It can't be.
Well, definitely wasn't over 20.
Yeah, it's somewhere in that 16 to 18 range. I'm predicting before I'm not going to even look it up.
14. It was less than 14. So he was 13.8 from three. He was 68.4% from the free throw line. So that's passable. And it shows that there's obviously room for improvement. That's just going to be the big thing for him, because it's hard to be a starter, especially if you're going to be, a guy 1 through 4 and only shoot 14% from three. Like, that's just obviously something that's got to improve.
You know what the other side of that is, though? Obviously what you say is true, but the flip side of that is it also shows you how damn good he is, that you could be essentially a 0 from three, or you can't shoot worth a lick, and you're still a valuable NBA player, a passable, viable, not just in the game, but an impactful NBA player. That goes to show you how much talent he is, the fact that he could impact the game despite not being able to shoot worth a lick.
Yeah, and he's going to learn how to shoot. That's my big prediction, is that the shooting will be much better next season.
All right, put a pin in that point that you made about Udoka and the rotations. We'll get back to him in a second. Last thing here on award / postseason analysis here. What's your biggest disappointment from the Rockets this season? There are a couple in an overall successful season, what do you think is the biggest disappointment? I know on X, on Twitter, I know we joked that it was the lack of Kelly Eco trade columns, and we'll see if those are revived next year or not. Shout out to Kelly Eco from The Athletic, our guy. But what do you feel like, aside from Kelly not fulfilling that part of that void in the Rockets season, what did you feel like was the biggest disappointment?
Not seeing them healthy after the All-Star break. It would have been nice to have seen that full group together with Eason and with Şengün and with Thompson coming into his own and with Whitmore coming into his own. Not having those guys together for the second half, I think that was the big thing for me, because I would like to have seen how that looked, especially once Jalen Green started to figure it out, once they started to play faster. So for me, it was just not being able to keep guys on the floor and ending the last 40 games of the year where Eason didn't play, and then Şengün missed all that time at the end. So, and Whitmore missed some time in there. So that was the big thing for me.
Yeah, mine is another way of saying the same thing. It's just the consistency. We talked about this earlier. Like, I mentioned improvement is going to come from them becoming a more consistent team. They could have stood to be a lot more consistent, I feel like, throughout the year. And I think one of the reasons for that is what you just described, what you just explained. They weren't healthy all the time. They're also young players. Some of them adjusting to new coaching, young NBA players adjusting to new coaching. Some of them rookies, right? In the case of Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore, so adjusting to just the NBA for the first time. So there's part of that. But to me, it's just overall consistency, because I would point to what we mentioned earlier about those games at the end, where you get that encouraging Orlando game as their last home game of the season. But the Golden State game did happen. That Mavs game did happen, and all within a short period of time. And to me, they highlight both the Rockets' progression in the case of the Orlando game, as we talked about before, but also the inconsistency in terms of the ebb and flow of showing up on a night in and night out basis, just knowing exactly what that means. Because I didn't feel like it was for a lack of effort, a lack of trying. We had a lot of fun on the radio, I feel like, about Ime Udoka's sometimes harsh critiques, or just blunt. Maybe blunt is a good way to call him. Just straightforward, not really much of a sugarcoating. Like, he just kind of says it, whatever it is or whatever he's thinking. And we had fun with that on the radio, but I think there was some legit frustration in, hey, where's the repeatability here? Why don't we do this on a night in and night out basis? So I would say the injuries had a lot to do with it, and it was disappointing to not see, like, you get that Jalen Green, upswing right after Alperen Şengün is injured for the year. And while Alperen Şengün's cooking in, what was it, the months of January and February were some of Jalen Green's worst months of his career. You could even just isolate that as perhaps one of the biggest disappointments of the year, that he played like that at all. But I would point to more so just the overall lack of consistency or need for more of it going forward with this team.
Yeah, I think that's very that works.
Okay, so last thing so we can get out of here, the Udoka effect. And I'm going to let you speak to this, man, but because, you were around the team as much as anybody, if not more than anybody. But I just feel like, we talked about it a lot, but the overall toughness of the team is what stands out the most. But then also, like, the watchability factor. Like, you and I cover the team. We do this professionally. I'm also, I double up as a fan of the team. So I would watch them even if I didn't, right? So, like, we're watching these games kind of no matter what. But we can acknowledge over the last few years, they were a difficult watch. They weren't just bad. They were sometimes painful to watch, to where you could understand that, hey, if you're not getting paid to do this, I don't blame you for changing the channel, but, finding something else to watch. They were compelling this year, like legitimately compelling, whether they were winning or losing. It was a fun watch. And I think that Udoka's got a lot to do with that. Maybe the uptick in intensity and sort of just overall pride and toughness has a lot to do with that. But I'm curious from you, what did you think was the biggest impact that Ime Udoka made on this team this year?
Well, just on the watchability thing, real quick, the talent level was upgraded pretty significantly,
Fair.
and I think that's a big reason why they were just much more watchable. Um, you look at like the top guys that were coming off the bench last year, and it's like Josh Christopher and Dacian Nix and Usman Garuba, basically guys who aren't in the league at this point, or they're on two ways. Like those were the most important reserves that KJ Martin's not playing a whole lot right now in Philly. He was a starter on last year's team. So just the overall talent increase, I think, was obviously a huge, huge difference. I mean, they have one guy get hurt and they bring out, a top 4 pick who now all of a sudden goes into the starting line. Just the talent level was such a difference this year. On Udoka, obviously, the toughness part and the culture part of it, the toughness part is huge because there were a lot of scuffles towards the end of the year, and there were a lot of technical fouls, and they weren't going to back down from teams, and that's what they wanted. Like you go all the way back to November when Udoka got into it with LeBron James. Like Udoka did not want to have Udoka wanted his team to be the ones to get into it with LeBron James. Like, hey, you can respect your opponent, but you don't have to be in awe of your opponent. And I think that was the big thing that he wanted to see change. Is like, hey, respect that you're playing against LeBron James, but don't go over there and ask for his autograph and stuff like that. Like,
Don't be like, hey man, my dad played against you your rookie year.
Yeah, you're competing against these guys at the end of the day, and so just there was an uptick in just the level of competitiveness with this team, and Udoka loved it. Like Udoka's being asked about them getting too many technical fouls or them getting into too many scuffles, and he basically did not care. He said, "Nah, I'm cool with it." Like, be smart. He didn't get upset that Amen Thompson, whatever, elbowed whoever it was. It Tim Hardaway in Dallas.
It wasn't Hardaway. What was it?
Whoever it was.
Maybe it was excellent. Yeah.
Wasn't upset that he elbowed him or whatever. He got upset more than anything that he went too high.
Yeah, lower.
Said, if you're gonna hit a guy, do it low. If you're Jabari Smith and you're gonna throw a punch, make sure you land it. Otherwise, you're getting suspended for nothing. So that was the little things that he kind of brought to this group, and that's just kind of who he is as a player. That's who he was, where he would get into fights. And there's a great story about him getting into an all-out brawl. I think it was in Algeria, playing for the Nigerian national team, where he's just taking on all these guys all by himself. That's what he wanted this group to be, and I think that's what they became as the season went along. It took some time to get there, but this group showed a level of toughness that maybe they didn't have before. And then the other thing was just how he would go about playing time. And this was a big thing for him before the season started, where you're going to have to earn minutes. Like, we're not just going to give you minutes. If you deserve minutes, you're going to get minutes. And that's what he did. And he was not shy about benching guys late in games. I think that you can probably look at all 5 starters were benched at one point except for Van Vliet. Şengün was benched at one point. Jalen Green was benched on many occasions. Jabari Smith Jr. was benched a lot early in the year. Dylan Brooks even had games where he got benched. The one guy who did not get benched was Van Vliet, and that's just because, as we talked about, they really struggled when he wasn't on the floor. So I think with some coaches, if you point, like when D'Antoni was the coach a couple of those years, if you gave me a time of the game, you could say, there's 8:40 left in the second quarter. I could have told you who was going to be on the floor during that stretch because of how consistent D'Antoni was with his rotations. Udoka's not like that. Udoka's going to go by feel a lot of times when it comes to these rotations. And I think that was probably a change that this young group needed. And just because you are in the starting lineup, it doesn't mean that you're going to be playing when the game is on the line. Like, you've got to earn it. And you're not just earning your starting spot. You're not just earning your minutes, you're earning your minutes as the game goes along. And I think that for a young group, that sort of stuff is important because it shows you that you're going to get rewarded. If you play the game the right way, you might have only played 7 minutes this game, but you could easily play 33 the next game.
Man, Austin, I know you're paying attention in the background, dog. I wish I had my drop, or I think it's Tyler's drop, T Mills drop on the drive, where he's got me saying, ain't no bees around here. Ain't no bees around here. That is, and they actually play that whenever I go on with them and to talk about the Rockets or whatever. They intro me instead of the music that Figgy made. They play that, some kind of sounder, and then they play the little drop of, hey, ain't no bees around here. Totally different conversation and different context, but it fits perfectly with this team, the Ime Udoka effect, and how they approached confrontation in game. Ain't no bees around here. We ain't no bees. Don't call us no bees. If anybody gonna be the bees, it's gonna be you. And I don't know why on this podcast, for whatever reason, I don't feel comfortable saying the bees like I did on the air that one day. I think it was because Ron opened up a segment saying that we was all acting like a bunch of hoes, and I couldn't understand anything that he said for the rest of his little tangent until I could circle back to that. Like, hey, wait a minute. And somehow in my mind, the word hoes was transferred to bees. And I was like, well, first of all, ain't no bees around here. Let's just get that off the top. And then we could address whatever points we gonna make in this segment. So I don't know. Hey, get Austin, pull that. So whenever we have Udoka conversations or next season, when there's some fisticuffs or even just a couple scuffles, technical fouls, double text, whatever it may be, want to let them know ain't no bees around here. That's Adam Spolane. I'm B. Scott, Brandon Scott here for the H-Town Hoops podcast. Austin Mendez handling things for us behind the scenes. We'll be back hitting a little bit of the Rockets all season. Of course, you got the lottery coming up on May 12th, and of course the NBA draft coming up on June 26th. We'll be in and out, and might even, I don't know, we'll see how interesting these playoffs get. Might even have a couple of surprise episodes for you here and there. So in the meantime, though, make sure you subscribe, rating, reviewing, telling your friends. Also check us out on the Sports Radio 610 YouTube page. And until next time, y'all be good.